A weary woman walks the perilous streets of a gang-ruled city, saved by a shadowy vigilante with a cryptic symbol. But as she uncovers the truth about his connection to her family, she faces a choice that could either shatter the city's fear or doom them both to its darkness. The cobblestones of Ciudad Gris gleamed under the faint glow of the streetlights, slick with the remnants of a recent rain. Leah pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she navigated the labyrinthine streets. Her feet ached from hours spent at the Armazém, lifting crates and answering the impatient calls of customers. The clinking of distant chains and the faint hum of machinery were the soundtrack to her weary journey home. She avoided the northern routes, the territory controlled by Pharaoh A. Sangue. Those streets were marked by graffiti and the shadowy figures that seemed to melt into the darkness. Her pulse quickened at the thought of running into one of them. Each step was calculated, a dance between speed and silence, her eyes darting to every alley and shadow. Then, like a predator sensing its prey, she felt it, the undeniable weight of eyes on her back. "Hey there, chica." The voice was cold, sharp as a blade. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Turning slowly, she saw them, 4 men, clad in leather jackets adorned with Pharaoh Sangue's blood-red insignia. Their grins were wolfish, their intentions clear. "No trouble," she stammered, stepping back. Her voice betrayed her fear, and the gang members fed on it. "No trouble?" one of them echoed mockingly, stepping closer. His companions circled her like vultures. Her heart pounded and she clenched her fists, ready to fight if she had to. But before she could act, the shadows shifted. A low, almost imperceptible sound, a whisper of movement, made the gang members pause. "What was that?" one of them hissed. From the corner of her eye, Leah saw him. A figure emerged from the darkness, his movements fluid and silent, as though he belonged to the night itself. The gang barely had time to react before chaos erupted. In a blur of motion, the vigilante struck. His blows were precise, almost surgical, each one landing with a sickening thud. The gang members crumpled one by one, their bravado reduced to groans of pain. Leah stood frozen, torn between terror and awe. When the last man fell, the vigilante turned to her. His face remained obscured by a hood, but his presence was undeniable, a mix of menace and salvation. Before she could muster a word, he vanished as swiftly as he had appeared, leaving only the faint echo of his steps. Leah's gaze fell to the wall beside her, where a strange symbol had been scrawled in black paint. It resembled an eye, its lines sharp and deliberate. The sight of it sent a shiver down her spine. The air seemed heavier now, the silence oppressive. Gathering her courage, she fled, her footsteps echoing through the empty streets. When she finally reached her small apartment, she bolted the door behind her and collapsed onto her bed. Her hands trembled as she replayed the night's events. Who was that man? Why had he helped her? The symbol lingered in her mind, an enigma as unsettling as the man who left it. For the first time, the shadows of Ciudad Gris felt alive, and she wasn't sure if they were friend or foe. The morning came reluctantly, its pale light creeping through the gray smog that hung over Ciudad Gris. Leah stirred in her bed, her dreams plagued by flashes of the previous night, the gang's cruel laughter, the vigilantes' swift and brutal strikes, and the ominous symbol etched onto the wall. She rubbed her temples and forced herself to rise. Her apartment was cramped but tidy, its few belongings arranged with care. In the corner, her sister Camilla lay curled on a thin mattress, her breath shallow and labored. A hacking cough broke the fragile silence, and Leah was at her side in an instant. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from Camilla's damp forehead. Camilla gave a weak smile. "Better. Don't worry about me." But Leah's heart ached. She knew the medicine they had was running out, and the thought of seeking help in a city dominated by fear was a daunting one. Still, she would do whatever it took to protect her sister. After preparing a meager breakfast, Leah ventured out, her nerves raw and her senses heightened. Every shadow seemed to carry a hidden threat. As she passed the alley where the attack had occurred, she hesitated. The symbol was still there, untouched by the grime and graffiti that marked the rest of the city. A chill ran down her spine. Was it a warning? A message? She shook off the thought and quickened her pace. The streets buzzed with an undercurrent of tension, a palpable unease that seemed to ripple through the city. Word of the vigilantes' intervention had spread quickly. People whispered in hushed tones and gang members patrolled with renewed vigilance. The name El Chacal was spoken with reverence and fear. The gang leader had issued a clear command: find the masked stranger. At the Armazém, Leah struggled to focus on her tasks. The usual banter among her co-workers was replaced by nervous glances and whispered speculations. She felt the weight of invisible eyes on her throughout the day, her skin prickling with the sensation of being watched. As she left work, the setting sun painted the city in hues of orange and gray, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her. She tightened her grip on her bag and took a different route home, avoiding the usual shortcuts. Despite her precautions, the feeling of being followed persisted. When she finally reached her apartment, relief washed over her. But the moment she locked the door, a soft knock echoed through the room. Her heart leapt to her throat. She peeked through the peephole but saw no one. Hesitantly, she opened the door a crack. On the floor lay a folded piece of paper. She snatched it up and quickly locked the door again. Unfolding the note, her breath caught. It was a crude drawing of the same symbol from the alley, with a single word scrawled beneath it: Watcher. The walls seemed to close in around her. Leah's mind raced. Was the vigilante trying to communicate? Or was this some twisted ploy by Pharaoh A. Sangue? That night, as Camilla slept fitfully, Leah sat by the window, staring into the darkness. The streets below were eerily quiet, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there watching. Leah woke to the faint light of dawn streaming through the window, her body tense from another restless night. The crumpled note lay on the table, its cryptic message gnawing at her thoughts. She folded it and tucked it into her pocket before glancing at Camilla, who stirred weakly under the thin blanket. The morning routine passed in a blur. As she left for work, the street seemed quieter than usual, the usual hum of activity muted by the heavy atmosphere of fear. The city felt different now, as though it held its breath, waiting for something to happen. At the Armazém, the mood was tense. Whispers circulated among the workers, stories of strange sightings and escalated violence from Pharaoh A. Sangue. But what caught Leah's attention most were the symbols. She had seen another on her walk to work, painted near the corner of a derelict building. Now, as she carried a crate to the storeroom, her gaze landed on yet another. This one etched faintly onto a wooden beam inside. Her pulse quickened. The symbols weren't random. They were deliberate, placed in locations she frequented. Someone was leaving them for her, and she couldn't decide whether it was meant as guidance or intimidation. Leah, her coworker muttered, breaking her thoughts. You've got to be careful. They're looking for people to blame. She nodded but said nothing, her mind racing. The gang's patrols had grown bolder and more frequent, their eyes sharp and searching. It was only a matter of time before they turned their full attention to her. That evening, she left the Armazém with her head down, avoiding eye contact with the gang members lounging at street corners. The sun dipped below the horizon, and shadows crept across the city. As she approached her usual shortcut, she stopped. A fresh symbol marked the wall ahead, larger and bolder than the others. She hesitated, torn between the urge to investigate and the instinct to flee. The sound of approaching footsteps made the decision for her. She darted down the alley, her heartbeat thunderous. She didn't stop until she reached her apartment, locking the door behind her. Camilla greeted her with a weak smile. You're late, she whispered. Sorry, Leah replied, forcing a calm tone. She set down her bag and began preparing a simple dinner, but her mind was elsewhere. The symbols, the note, the ever-present feeling of being watched. It was too much. Later, as she sat by the window, her thoughts spiraled. Was the vigilante behind the symbols? If so, why hadn't he spoken to her directly? And if it wasn't him, who else would leave such cryptic messages? She glanced at Camilla, who slept peacefully despite her frailty. Whatever was happening, it was putting both of them at risk. Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of movement outside. Peering through the curtains, she saw a figure standing in the street below, cloaked in darkness. They didn't move, didn't call out, but Leah felt their eyes on her. Her breath hitched as the figure raised a hand and pointed toward the alley she had avoided earlier. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone. Leah's hands trembled. She didn't know whether to feel fear or curiosity. The symbols, the silent watcher, and the gang's escalating violence, it was all connected. She had no choice but to uncover the truth, but with every step closer, the danger loomed larger. As she lay in bed that night, sleep eluded her. The question repeated in her mind like a mantra. Was the vigilante her savior, or did he have his own hidden motives? El Chacal leaned back in his leather chair, his sharp eyes scanning the room. The dim glow of a single bulb cast jagged shadows across his scarred face. Around him, his lieutenants stood in tense silence, awaiting his orders. "They say the vigilante showed himself again," El Chacal muttered, his voice gravelly. He drummed his fingers against the armrest, his mind calculating. "He's not just a rumor anymore. He's real, and he's bold enough to meddle in my business." One of the men shifted nervously. "We've been looking for him, Jefe, but he's like a ghost." El Chacal's lips curled into a cold smile. "Ghosts can be trapped, and I know just how to lure this one out." Leah shuffled through her meager earnings, her heart sinking. The bills on the table far outweighed the coins in her hand. Medicine for Camila, food for the weak, rent, all impossible demands on her limited income. The relentless pressure pressed down on her shoulders, making her feel as though the walls of their tiny apartment were closing in. A soft cough drew her attention. Camila was sitting up in bed, her face pale and drawn. "Leah, stop worrying about me," she said weakly. "I'll get better. I just need rest." Leah knelt beside her, brushing her sister's hair back gently. "I'll take care of everything, Camila. Don't you worry." But even as she spoke, a knot of fear tightened in her chest. The gang was everywhere, their presence inescapable. Every corner she turned, she saw their leering faces and heard their taunting laughter. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. Pharaoh Isangwe had turned their sights on her. She kept her head down as she walked through the city, avoiding the shortcuts she once relied on. The symbols were appearing more frequently now, and every new one seemed to bring her closer to something she couldn't yet define. Despite her fear, curiosity burned within her. Who was behind them, and why had they chosen her? Her routine was disrupted that evening. 2 gang members loitered near her building, their eyes tracking her every move. She swallowed her fear and walked past them, her steps steady but quick. Inside, she bolted the door and drew the curtains. Camila looked up from her book. "Are they outside again?" Leah nodded, forcing a smile. "They're just trying to scare us." But she knew it was more than that. Pharaoh Isangwe's grip on the city was tightening, and El Chacal was known for his ruthless strategies. Whatever he had planned, it was only a matter of time before it reached her doorstep. Later that night, Leah sat at the table, staring at the crumpled note with the symbol. She felt trapped, hemmed in by forces far beyond her control. The vigilante, the gang, the symbols, they were pieces of a puzzle she didn't have the energy to solve. She was startled by a loud knock at the door. Her heart raced as she hesitated, unsure whether to answer. Another knock, harder this time. Gathering her courage, she opened the door a crack. A man in a leather jacket stood there, his expression cold. "El Chacal wants to see you." Leah's blood ran cold. She slammed the door and locked it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Whatever was coming next, she knew it was only the beginning. The world outside was eerily quiet as Leah paced her apartment, her thoughts in turmoil. The gang's message was clear. She was now a pawn in El Chacal's game. The knock at her door hours earlier still echoed in her mind, a grim reminder of the danger closing in. Camila stirred in her bed, her feverish murmurs pulling Leah from her spiraling thoughts. She knelt beside her sister, holding her frail hand. "I'll find a way to keep us safe," she whispered, though doubt gnawed at her resolve. The symbols, the vigilante, the gang. Each thread seemed to pull her deeper into a web she couldn't escape. If she had any hope of protecting Camila, she needed answers, and she needed them soon. The streets of Ciudad Gris were veiled in darkness when Leah ventured out, her steps careful and deliberate. She didn't know where she was going, but her instincts guided her. The city felt alive with an unseen energy, every shadow a potential threat or ally. Turning a corner, she froze. There it was again, the symbol, freshly painted on the crumbling brick wall of an abandoned factory. It loomed larger than ever, almost daring her to approach. "Why do you keep following me?" she whispered to the empty air, her voice trembling. "You've been asking the wrong questions." The voice came from the shadows, low and steady. Leah spun around, her heart pounding as a figure emerged. The vigilante. He moved with an almost predatory grace, his face obscured by a hood and mask. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice wavering between fear and anger. He took a step closer, his presence commanding. "Icaro," he said simply, his tone giving nothing away. I've been watching over you. Watching me? She snapped. Why? What do you want from me? Ikaro hesitated, as if weighing his words. It's not about what I want. It's about what I owe. What you owe? Leah's confusion deepened. To who? To me? To your family, Ikaro replied, his voice softening. Your father saved my life once, a long time ago. I swore I'd repay that debt no matter the cost. The revelation hit Leah like a blow. Her father's memory was a faded blur, a figure lost to time and tragedy. You're lying, she said, shaking her head. My father, he's been gone for years. I know, Ikaro said quietly, but his legacy lives on, and so does the danger he tried to shield you from. Leah's mind raced, the weight of his words crashing over her. If Ikaro was telling the truth, her father's actions had drawn her into this dangerous game long before she understood the stakes. Then why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked, her voice cracking. Why hide in the shadows? To keep you safe, Ikaro said firmly. If the gang knew of my connection to you, they'd use it against us, just like they're trying to now. The mention of the gang snapped her back to the present. El Chacal, she murmured. He wants me. He doesn't just want you, Ikaro corrected. He wants control. He'll use whatever or whoever he can to maintain his power. Leah stared at him, torn between trust and suspicion. Ikaro's presence was both a relief and a threat, his motives tangled in a history she barely remembered. I don't know if I can trust you, she admitted, taking a step back. You don't have to trust me, Ikaro said. But if you want to survive, if you want to protect Camila, you'll need my help. His words lingered as Leah turned and walked away, her thoughts a whirlwind. She wasn't sure if Ikaro was her salvation or her doom, but one thing was clear. The shadows of Ciudad Gris held more secrets than she could fathom. The city felt heavier the next day, the air thick with unspoken tension. Leah couldn't shake the weight of Ikaro's words. He claimed to know her father, a man she barely remembered, a shadow from a past she had buried long ago. As she walked to work, her mind churned with questions. Who was Ikaro really? And why had her father's actions tied her to this relentless danger? The streets were quieter than usual, but Leah knew better than to feel safe. Pharaoh Esange's presence had grown even more oppressive. Their patrols were more frequent, their eyes sharper. She avoided their gaze, keeping her head down, but her thoughts remained focused on the puzzle Ikaro had dropped into her lap. At the Armazem, the whispers among her co-workers were louder now. Stories of the vigilante's latest appearance mingled with rumors about El Chacal's escalating plans. Leah overheard snippets of conversations, each one feeding her growing sense of unease. He's using someone as bait, one man muttered. I heard it's that girl, the one with the sister, another replied, glancing in Leah's direction before quickly looking away. The words chilled her to the bone. El Chacal wasn't just targeting her, he was involving Camila. Her sister's frail health made her the perfect leverage. The thought made Leah's stomach churn with anger and fear. By the time she returned home that evening, the weight of the day had settled heavily on her shoulders. Camila greeted her with a weak smile, but even that couldn't lighten Leah's mood. You look worried, Camila said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It's nothing, Leah lied, sitting on the edge of the bed. She couldn't burden her sister with the truth, not when Camila already had so much to endure. But as she looked at her, frail and vulnerable, Leah felt a surge of determination. She had to protect her, no matter what. As night fell, Leah paced the apartment, her thoughts racing. She needed answers, and Ikaro was the only one who could give them to her. Against her better judgment, she slipped out into the streets, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. The symbols guided her again. Freshly painted, they led her to a derelict warehouse on the edge of the city. The air was damp and cold as she stepped inside, her footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. I knew you'd come, Ikaro's voice called from the shadows. He stepped into the dim light, his face still obscured. Leah clenched her fists, her anger bubbling to the surface. If you knew I'd come, then tell me the truth, she demanded. What aren't you telling me about my father? Ikaro hesitated, his shoulders tensing. Your father was a good man, he began, but he was also involved in something dangerous. He worked against the gang long before they rose to power. He believed in protecting this city, but his choices put a target on your family. Leah's chest tightened. And that's why they killed him? Yes, Ikaro admitted. El Chacal's predecessor made sure of it. But your father's efforts weren't in vain. He saved lives, inspired others to resist. And now, whether you want it or not, that legacy falls to you. The weight of Ikaro's words settled over her like a storm cloud. Her father's fight had become hers, and there was no escaping it. As she absorbed the revelation, a distant sound shattered the moment, a loud bang followed by shouting. Ikaro's posture stiffened. "They found us," he said grimly. Leah's heart raced as Ikaro led her to a side exit. "This isn't over," he said, his voice firm. "We'll talk again, but for now, stay alive." As she fled into the night, Leah knew one thing for certain. Her past was catching up to her, and the fight her father had started was far from over. The days blurred into nights as Leah grappled with the weight of her father's legacy and the danger closing in on her and Camila. Pharaoh Esangwe's patrols had intensified, and whispers of El Chacal's growing wrath spread like wildfire. Leah knew she was running out of time. Camila's condition worsened, the medicine was nearly gone, and Leah's desperate attempts to find more were met with closed doors and cold shoulders. The city's fear of Pharaoh Esangwe was palpable, silencing even the kindest of souls. One evening, as Leah returned to their cramped apartment, she found a note slipped under the door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was chillingly clear. "Come to the old market, alone, midnight." Her chest tightened as she read it again. The trap was obvious, yet she had no choice. If she ignored it, they would come for Camila. If she went, she would be walking straight into El Chacal's grasp. Leah folded the note and tucked it into her pocket. As she turned, she found Camila watching her from the bed. "What's wrong?" her sister asked, her voice weak but laced with concern. "Nothing," Leah lied, forcing a smile. "Just something from work." Camila didn't believe her, but she was too tired to press further. Leah knelt by her side, brushing a strand of hair from her sister's face. "I'll fix this," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. At midnight, the old market was shrouded in darkness, its once bustling stalls now empty and decayed. Leah's footsteps echoed eerily as she approached the center of the square. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but she pressed on, clutching the note tightly in her hand. "I knew you'd come," a voice drawled, breaking the silence. El Chacal stepped out of the shadows, his imposing figure illuminated by the faint moonlight. His scarred face twisted into a cruel smile. Leah stood her ground, though her heart hammered in her chest. "What do you want from me?" El Chacal chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "You've become quite the inconvenience, Chica, but you're also useful. You see, the vigilante, your so-called protector, cares about you, and I intend to use that against him." "I don't know what you're talking about," Leah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Don't play dumb," El Chacal snapped, his grin fading. "Ikaro will come for you, and when he does, he'll regret ever crossing me." Before Leah could respond, the sound of a scuffle erupted behind her. She turned to see Ikaro emerging from the shadows, his movements swift and calculated. But he wasn't here to attack, he was here to surrender. "Let her go," Ikaro said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm the one you want." Leah's heart sank as two gang members grabbed him, forcing him to his knees. "Ikaro, no!" she cried, taking a step forward. He looked at her, his eyes steady. "Get Camila and leave, don't look back." El Chacal laughed, triumphant. "How noble, but she's not going anywhere, not yet." As the gang dragged Ikaro away, Leah was left standing in the desolate market, torn between her loyalty to her sister and the man who had just sacrificed himself for her. She clenched her fists, a resolve hardening in her chest. She would find a way to save him, even if it meant risking everything. The air in Ciudad Gris was suffocating, thick with the gang's dominance and the tension simmering beneath the surface. News of Ikaro's capture spread quickly, but it was veiled in whispers, spoken only behind closed doors. To most, it was another victory for El Chacal. To Leah, it was a devastating loss she couldn't afford to accept. Back in her apartment, Leah paced relentlessly. Camila watched her from the bed, her pale face etched with concern. "You've been restless for days," Camila said softly. "What's wrong?" Leah hesitated. The truth weighed heavily on her, but she couldn't hide it anymore. "They took him, Camila. The vigilante. Ikaro. He gave himself up so we could be safe." Camila's eyes widened. "Then you have to help him." "How?" Leah snapped, frustration bubbling over. They control everything. I'm one person, and they're everywhere. Camilla's voice was steady, despite her frailty. You're not alone. The people here hate Pharaoh Isangwe as much as you do. They just need someone to give them hope. Leah paused, her sister's words sinking in. The people of Ciudad Greece lived in fear, but fear could turn to anger, and anger could fuel change. Icaro had risked everything for her and Camilla. She couldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. The next day, Leah moved with purpose. She visited the neighbors, speaking in hushed tones. She sought out old friends from the Armazem, people who had quietly suffered under El Chacal's rule. At first, many were hesitant, their fear evident. But as Leah spoke, sharing her story and Icaro's sacrifice, she saw their resolve begin to harden. We've lived like this for too long, one man said, his voice trembling with both fear and determination. If we don't stand now, we never will. Word spread quickly. By nightfall, Leah had gathered a small group willing to fight. Their numbers weren't enough to take on the gang directly, but together, they could stage a bold and calculated rescue. Leah stood before them in an abandoned warehouse, the same one where she had first encountered Icaro. This isn't just about saving one man, she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. This is about taking back our city. Pharaoh Isangwe has ruled through fear for too long. If we succeed, we'll show everyone that they aren't invincible. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The plan was simple but risky. Create a distraction near the gang's main hideout while a smaller group infiltrated the building to free Icaro. Leah would lead the infiltration herself. That night, as the group moved into position, Leah felt the weight of her decision. Failure would mean not only her death, but the continued suffering of the people she was trying to inspire. Still, she pressed on, her thoughts focused on Camilla and the future she wanted for her sister. The first explosion rocked the air, the distraction drawing the gang's attention as planned. Leah and her team slipped through the shadows, entering the hideout through a side entrance. Her heart raced as they moved deeper into the building, navigating dimly lit corridors. The sound of shouting and running feet filled the air, but they remained undetected. When they finally reached the holding area, Leah saw him. Icaro was restrained, but alive, his expression dark with defiance even in chains. He looked up as they approached, his eyes widening in surprise. "Leah," he murmured, "you shouldn't be here." "I had to come," she replied, her voice firm. "We're getting you out." As they began to free him, the sound of footsteps approached. The rescue wasn't over yet, and the real battle was just beginning. The dimly lit corridors of the Pharaoh Isangwe hideout pulsed with the distant sounds of chaos. Shouts, gunfire, and the occasional explosion as the diversion outside raged on. Leah moved swiftly, her breath shallow, and her heart pounding. Icaro, now freed from his restraints, walked beside her, his sharp eyes scanning every shadow. "You shouldn't have come for me," he said quietly, though there was a flicker of gratitude in his tone. Leah shot him a determined glance. "You sacrificed yourself for me. I wasn't going to leave you to them." Before he could reply, a voice echoed through the hallway ahead. "There they are!" The clatter of boots followed, and within moments, gang members emerged, weapons drawn. "Go!" Icaro barked, stepping forward to engage the attackers. His movements were fluid and precise, each strike neutralizing a threat before they could react. Leah hesitated for only a moment before slipping past the fray, her team covering her as she pressed forward. The deeper she ventured into the hideout, the darker it became, the flickering light of exposed bulbs casting ominous shadows on the walls. Finally, she entered a cavernous room at the center of the building. Stacks of crates and scattered weapons hinted at the gang's operations, but it was the figure standing in the center that drew her attention, El Chacal. The gang leader stood with an air of calm arrogance, his scarred face illuminated by the faint glow of a single overhead light. A cruel smile curled his lips as he spread his arms, as if welcoming her into his lair. "Well, well," he drawled. "The little mouse found her way into the lion's den." Leah clenched her fists, her fear pushed aside by a surge of anger. "Your reign of terror ends here." El Chacal laughed, the sound echoing ominously. "Brave words, Nina, but you're in over your head." He gestured to the shadows, and more gang members appeared, surrounding her. Leah's hand tightened around the knife she had tucked into her belt. She felt the weight of the odds against her, but she refused to back down. "You've ruled through fear long enough," she said, her voice steady. "The people of this city won't stand for it anymore." El Chacal's grin faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "And what do you think you can do about it?" A loud crash interrupted the standoff. Icaro burst into the room, his face set in grim determination. Behind him, members of Leah's makeshift resistance followed, armed with whatever they could scavenge. The tide of the fight shifted as chaos erupted once again. Leah seized the opportunity to confront El Chacal directly. He lunged at her, but she sidestepped, her movements fueled by a mix of adrenaline and desperation. He was stronger, but she was faster, her strikes aimed with precision. The fight was brutal, each blow exchanged with deadly intent. Finally, with a burst of strength, Leah drove her knife into his shoulder, forcing him to drop his weapon. He staggered back, his expression twisted with pain and disbelief. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled, clutching his wound. "You're nothing." Leah stepped closer, her voice unwavering. "You're wrong. I'm not alone, and we're done being afraid." As if to punctuate her words, the remaining gang members were overwhelmed by the resistance fighters. The sound of El Chacal's empire crumbling was deafening. When it was over, Leah stood over him, her breath ragged. "Ciudad Grip belongs to its people now." El Chacal's sneer faded as he collapsed, defeated. The night sky stretched over the city, quiet for the first time in years. The hideout lay in ruins, and the gang's hold had been broken. Leah and Icaro stood side by side, their silhouettes framed by the first rays of dawn. "It's not over," Icaro said softly. "But it's a start." Leah nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. For the first time in a long while, hope felt tangible. The sun rose slowly over Ciudad Gris, casting its golden light on streets once shrouded in perpetual gloom. For the first time in years, the city was quiet, not with fear, but with a cautious sense of relief. El Chacal's reign had ended, and the gang's power had fractured in the wake of the resistance's victory. Leah stood on the rooftop of her apartment building, the morning air cool against her skin. Below, neighbors cautiously emerged from their homes, their faces a mix of exhaustion and tentative hope. She could hear murmurs of conversation, see hesitant smiles exchanged between strangers. The fight had cost them much, but it had also given them something invaluable: the belief that change was possible. Behind her, Camilla approached, bundled in a blanket. Her color had returned, and though her steps were slow, there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there in weeks. "It's over, isn't it?" Camilla asked, her voice soft but steady. "For now," Leah replied, turning to face her sister. "But there's still a lot to rebuild." Camilla smiled faintly. "You did it, Leah. You gave the city hope." Leah reached out and squeezed her sister's hand. "We all did. It wasn't just me." Her gaze shifted to the horizon, where the ruins of Pharaoh Esangwe's hideout loomed in the distance. The memories of the fight, the fear, the determination, and the final confrontation with El Chacal flashed through her mind. She had never thought of herself as a leader, but necessity had forced her to rise to the challenge. Later that day, as the city began to stir with activity, Leah walked through the streets. She saw signs of change everywhere: people cleaning graffiti from walls, children playing openly in the alleys, and vendors setting up stalls in places once ruled by gang patrols. The shadows of fear still lingered, but they no longer held the same power. As she passed a familiar alley, something caught her eye. A new symbol had been painted on the wall, bold and deliberate. It wasn't the same one Icaro had left before, but its meaning was clear: hope. Leah smiled faintly. She didn't need to wonder who had left it. That evening, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find a small envelope on the ground. Picking it up, she unfolded the paper inside and recognized Icaro's handwriting. "The city still needs its shadows, but you've proven it doesn't need me. Thank you for reminding me what hope looks like. You won't see me, but I'll always be watching." The words brought a lump to her throat. Icaro had disappeared as suddenly as he had entered her life, leaving only his legacy in the form of the people he had inspired. Leah folded the note and tucked it into her pocket, her resolve stronger than ever. Weeks turned into months, and Ciudad Gris slowly began to rebuild. Leah took on a new role, helping to organize efforts to restore the city's infrastructure and care for its people. Camilla's health improved with access to better resources, her laughter a sound that filled their apartment with warmth. The scars of the past remained, but they served as reminders of what the city had overcome. One night, as Leah walked home from a meeting, she paused at an empty street corner. The faintest movement in the shadows caught her eye, but when she turned, there was no one there. A faint smile touched her lips. She didn't need to see him to know he was there, watching over the city like a silent guardian. Ciudad Gris still had its shadows, but now, those shadows carried hope instead of fear. The story of Leah reminds us that courage often emerges not from fearlessness, but from the determination to protect those we love. Her journey shows how even in the darkest corners, hope can ignite change when we choose to stand against oppression. Would you have risked everything like Leah to face the shadows and protect your family? Or would fear have kept you from taking that step? Click the video on your screen to continue this journey of self-discovery and uncover more stories that challenge the boundaries of bravery and resilience. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join us on more inspiring adventures, and thank you for being part of this one. See you in the next video.